The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the phone call, it was the sign itself. A freshly printed board had been staked into the gravel beside my horse barn. In bold letters it read *Realtor Tour Parking. I knew immediately that I hadn't put it there, and neither had my ranch hand. For a moment I wondered if someone was pulling a prank. That feeling disappeared when 3 black SUVs rolled slowly up my driveway. Men climbed out carrying clipboards, wearing polished name badges and expensive shoes that had no business walking through a working ranch. One of them waved at me with the confidence of someone who believed he already owned the place. Another raised his camera and began taking pictures of my horses without asking permission or even introducing himself. As I walked closer, something else caught my attention. Bright decorative ribbons had been tied around the barn door handles as if someone had prepared the entire property for a special event. It looked like the barn had been staged for visitors, my visitors, except I hadn't invited a single person. I asked the group who had given them permission to be there. One man smiled politely and explained that the neighborhood association had reserved the property for today's realtor showcase. Reserved, my property, my barn, my horses. According to him, everything had already been approved. There was even a detailed schedule with guided tour every 20 minutes, a coffee station, photo opportunities, and potential homebuyers expected to arrive throughout the afternoon. I asked one simple question: who signed the approval? The answer made my stomach drop. Because the name they gave wasn't mine. And whoever had done it hadn't stopped at placing a sign beside the barn. By the time I reached the front gate, I realized they had already started letting strangers onto my land. That was the moment I locked the gate, pulled out my phone, and called the police. The dispatcher answered before the second ring. I gave my name, my address. Then I kept it simple. There are people entering my private property without permission. The dispatcher asked one question. Were they invited? No. That was enough. He told me deputies were already on the way. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. By then, another SUV had turned into the driveway. More men climbed out. Most were dressed like real estate agents. A few carried cameras. One had a folding display board tucked under his arm. They all looked confused when they saw the gate closed. A man wearing a polo shirt walked toward me. He smiled. You must be the owner. I nodded. He extended his hand. I appreciate you letting us use the barn today. I never reached for his hand. I never agreed to any of this. His smile faded. I'm sorry. I said no one asked me. He stared for a second. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny. Because he thought I was joking. He pulled out a printed packet. At the top was the neighborhood's logo. Underneath it were the words, Private Community Realtor Showcase. My horse barn was listed as Stop 3. Estimated viewing time: 20 minutes. Refreshments available. Photography permitted. I kept reading. There were 6 stops. Mine was the only one that wasn't inside the subdivision. That didn't make any sense. My property had never been part of the HOA. Not when I bought it. Not afterward. The agent frowned. This came directly from the board. I don't care where it came from. It's wrong. He looked back toward the waiting vehicles. The other agents were beginning to notice something wasn't right. Nobody was unloading anything anymore. One man quietly folded up a tripod. Another lowered his camera. The excitement had disappeared. A pickup truck rolled up behind the SUVs. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to one of my neighboring ranchers. He climbed out. He looked from the crowd to me. Then to the sign. His face hardened. What are they doing here? I answered honestly. They think someone reserved my barn. He stared at the agents. You boys got permission. Nobody answered. That silence said everything. A second neighbor arrived. He'd driven past earlier that morning and noticed the extra traffic. Now he parked beside the fence. He looked at the growing line of vehicles. You expecting an auction? No. A wedding? No. He looked around again. Then what's this? One of the agents finally spoke. We were told this was part of today's property tour. My neighbor shook his head. This isn't community property. It's a working ranch. The agents began checking their paperwork. Quiet conversations started breaking out. One pointed at a map. Another pulled out his phone. A few of them walked away from the group. They weren't angry. They were embarrassed. Nobody likes discovering they've been sent somewhere they don't belong. Then another truck appeared. This one carried two men wearing HOA board badges. Neither of them looked happy. The driver climbed out first. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't apologize. Instead, he walked straight toward the gate. "Open it." I stayed where I was. "No." His jaw tightened. "This event has already started. Not on my property." He held up a clipboard. "The board approved today's route. The board doesn't own this land." He glanced toward the waiting agents. Then back at me. "You're creating problems for everyone." I almost laughed. They're here because someone else created the problem. The second board member stayed quiet. He kept looking around the ranch. His eyes settled on the horses. Then on the fencing. Then on the barns. He suddenly seemed less confident. Almost like he realized how serious this had become. The first board member wasn't backing down. He insisted there had been an agreement. I asked him the simplest question I could think of. "Show me my signature." He froze. For the first time, nobody spoke. The wind carried dust across the driveway. Even the agent stopped talking. The board member shuffled through his papers. One page. Then another. His confidence disappeared with every sheet. Finally, he admitted something. "I don't have it with me." "You don't have it because it doesn't exist." That landed hard. Several agents exchanged uneasy looks. One quietly returned to his SUV. Another started making phone calls. The event was already beginning to fall apart. Then my neighbor pointed toward the barn. "Hold on." Everyone turned. One of the side doors wasn't closed anymore. I knew I had locked it before sunrise. Now it stood open by nearly a foot. Nobody admitted opening it. Nobody even moved. For a moment, every eye stayed fixed on that dark doorway. And then we heard something move inside. Every conversation stopped. The sound came again. A sharp scrape against the concrete floor inside the barn. My oldest gelding let out a low snort. That told me someone or something had startled him. I walked toward the side door. Not fast. Not slow. Just enough to keep the horses calm. One of my neighbors followed a few steps behind. The HOA board members stayed where they were. The agents watched from the driveway. Nobody seemed eager to go inside first. I pushed the door open. Sunlight spilled across the aisle. Everything looked normal. The stalls were secure. The feed bins were closed. Nothing appeared damaged. Then I noticed fresh footprints. Not hoof prints. Boot prints. They ran from the side entrance toward the tack room. My neighbor saw them too. "You have somebody working this morning." I shook my head. "No." The tack room door was cracked open. I knew I had locked it before breakfast. I eased it open. The room was empty. But one shelf had been cleared. Not stolen. Moved. Boxes had been stacked against the wall. As if someone wanted to make more space. My neighbor frowned. "For what?" I didn't answer. Because I was looking at something else. A folded table. Still wrapped in plastic. It wasn't mine. Neither were the four metal chairs leaning against it. Outside, another voice called into the barn. "You need to see this." We stepped back into the sunlight. One of the real estate agents was holding a packet. He had found it on the hood of his SUV. This wasn't here earlier. Inside were printed schedules. Name tags. Property descriptions. There was even a page titled, "Featured Rustic Horse Barn Experience." It described my barn in detail. The age of the structure. The surrounding pasture. The riding arena. Even recommendations for the best camera angles. Someone had spent time putting it together. Too much time. One of the agents looked genuinely frustrated. "We were told the owner volunteered to be part of this." "I never did." He nodded slowly. "I believe you." That shifted the mood. Until then, most of the visitors had assumed it was a misunderstanding. Now they realized someone had misled all of them. The first HOA board member demanded to see the packet. He flipped through the pages. His face changed. He stopped talking. One page had his electronic approval listed beside the event. Another listed community sponsors. But something wasn't right. His approval date showed a day when the board hadn't even met. He stared at it. I never signed this version. The second board member grabbed the packet. His expression hardened. Where did you get this? The agent pointed to his vehicle. It was under my windshield. Neither board member spoke again. My neighbor leaned toward me. They're seeing it for the first time. It looked that way. If that was true, someone had created paperwork that neither I nor at least one board member recognized. Then another vehicle arrived. This time it wasn't another agent. It was a deputy's patrol truck. The deputy stepped out calmly. He spoke with me first. I explained everything from the beginning. The unexpected visitors. The signs. The printed schedules. The open barn door. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked everyone else for their version. The stories matched on one point. Every agent said they believed they had permission. Every neighbor confirmed the ranch had never been part of the HOA. Even the board members admitted they had no authority over my property. The deputy looked at the event paperwork. He read it twice. Then he asked one question. Who organized today's tour? Nobody answered immediately. The agents exchanged uncertain looks. Finally, one of them spoke. We received everything through email. From who? He read the sender's name. It belonged to a local event coordinator. The deputy wrote it down. Then another agent stepped forward. I have something else. He opened his phone. It wasn't just an email. There was an online registration page. He showed it to the deputy. The page displayed my ranch, my barn, my entrance gate, even aerial photographs. The deputy studied the screen. Do you know who built this website? No. But whoever did had access to detailed information. That was the part that bothered me. The aerial photos weren't recent. One still showed an equipment shed I had demolished almost 2 years earlier. Whoever assembled the page had been collecting information for a long time. Long before today. The deputy asked me another question. Has anyone tried to buy this property recently? I paused. There had been offers. Several. All rejected. One investor had been especially persistent. He wanted the frontage along the county road. I wasn't selling. I hadn't thought much about it since. Until now. Before I could say another word, a neighbor standing near the mailbox called out. You all need to come look at this. Every head turned. Someone had just pulled another sign out of the ditch. Unlike the first one, this one wasn't directing people to parking. It was advertising an open house. At my address. Scheduled for that very afternoon. And beneath it in bold letters were the words, Future Development Opportunity. The deputy's expression changed immediately. He reached for his radio and asked dispatch to send another unit. The second deputy arrived less than 10 minutes later. By then, nobody was trying to enter the ranch. The agents had gathered near their vehicles. Most of them looked more frustrated than anything else. One kept repeating the same sentence. We should have verified the location. The deputies photographed every sign. They collected the printed schedules. They asked each agent to email copies of the invitations they had received. The event had effectively ended. But the questions were only getting bigger. One deputy walked the length of my fence line. When he came back, he carried another laminated marker. Someone had tied it to a fence post farther down the road. It matched the others. Same colors. Same logo. Same message directing visitors to my property. That meant it wasn't just one misplaced sign. Someone had spent time placing them. One of my neighbors folded his arms. This took planning. Nobody argued with him. The deputy asked if I had security cameras. I nodded. The entrance gate. The driveway. The barn. The equipment shed. Every recording was backed up automatically. He asked if we could review the footage. We went inside my office. The agent stayed outside. So did the board members. The video from that morning showed exactly what I expected. My ranch hand feeding the horses. The delivery truck bringing hay. Nothing unusual. Then we rolled back to the previous evening. At 7:43 p.m., headlights appeared. A pickup slowed near the entrance. It didn't stop. It kept going. 5 minutes later, another vehicle arrived. This one parked along the shoulder. A man stepped out. Baseball cap. Dark jacket. He walked straight to the entrance sign. He replaced it with the Realtor parking sign. Then he drove away. The deputy paused the video. Can you zoom in? The image sharpened. Not enough for a face, but enough for something else. The truck had a company logo on the driver's door. It belonged to a local sign installation contractor. One deputy immediately wrote the name down. That didn't prove the company was involved. Only that one of its trucks had been there. The investigation was beginning to take shape. Outside, voices grew louder. One of the board members was arguing with a real estate broker. The broker held up the event packet. You told us this was approved. I said the community tour was approved. This packet says the ranch was included. I never saw that version. The broker looked genuinely caught off guard. So somebody changed it. The board member didn't answer. He simply looked away. That silence said enough. A few minutes later, another surprise surfaced. One of the deputies walked over carrying a stack of envelopes. He had found them inside a plastic storage bin near the temporary tables. Every envelope contained printed maps. Each one highlighted my property. Each one included the same phrase. Exclusive future development site. That wasn't the language of a neighborhood open house. It sounded more like marketing. My neighbor looked at me. You still getting offers to sell? I nodded. Not anymore. Then maybe somebody wanted to make it look like you already had. That possibility hung in the air. No one dismissed it. The deputy asked everyone to remain available over the next few days. Statements would need to be confirmed. Documents compared. Emails traced. Nothing would happen quickly. Before leaving, he handed me a case number. Then he looked me in the eye. You did the right thing by calling. Those words mattered. Had I simply opened the gate, dozens of strangers would have wandered through a working horse barn. Insurance issues. Safety concerns. Property damage. None of it would have been easy to untangle afterward. The real estate agents slowly packed up. Several apologized before driving away. A few even admitted they felt embarrassed. They had trusted paperwork they assumed was legitimate. The HOA board members lingered. Neither had much to say anymore. Their confidence from earlier had disappeared. As the driveway emptied, the ranch finally became quiet again. The horses settled. The dust drifted away. For the first time all day, it felt like my property belonged to me again. Or so I thought. Just before sunset, my phone rang. It was one of the deputies. His voice was calm, but noticeably different. They had already spoken with the sign company. The truck in my security footage had been assigned to an employee. An employee who insisted he had only followed a paid work order. The deputy paused, then added one more sentence. The name listed on that work order wasn't mine. It wasn't the HOA's either. It belonged to someone I hadn't heard from in almost a year. The same investor who had repeatedly tried to buy the frontage along my ranch. And according to the deputy, he had already agreed to come in for an interview. The next morning started earlier than usual. I was already outside feeding the horses. The ranch was quiet again. Just the way I liked it. My phone rang shortly after sunrise. It was the deputy. The interview was finished. I waited. He admitted ordering the signs. That wasn't the answer I expected. The deputy continued. The man said he believed he had permission. Permission from who? That question had bothered everyone from the beginning. According to the deputy, the investor claimed he had hired an event coordinator. The coordinator had promised to organize a showcase for local brokers. The investor insisted he never intended for anyone to trespass. He thought the event would take place somewhere else. The deputy wasn't convinced. Neither was I. Too many details pointed directly at my ranch. The maps. The schedules. The photographs. The descriptions of my barn. Those weren't random mistakes. Someone had assembled them carefully. Over several weeks, the investigation shifted toward the event coordinator. Email records were reviewed. Invoices were compared. Work orders matched against payment receipts. Within days, the picture became much clearer. The HOA had approved a small realtor tour, but only inside the neighborhood. Nothing beyond the subdivision entrance. Nothing involving my ranch. Somewhere along the way, the event packet had been rewritten. Extra pages had been added. My address had replaced another location. Even the promotional website had been updated. Without the board's knowledge, several agents later confirmed they had never questioned it. Everything looked professional. The paperwork carried familiar logos. The schedule seemed organized. Nobody imagined it had been altered. The board members called an emergency meeting. For the first time, they invited nearby property owners who weren't even part of the HOA. I attended. So did both of my neighbors. The room was noticeably different from the driveway confrontation. Nobody was demanding anything. Nobody was raising their voice. The board president stood first. He acknowledged that the event had never been authorized to use private property outside the community. He apologized for how the confusion had unfolded. One by one, the other board members agreed. They also announced new procedures. Future community events would require written confirmation directly from every participating property owner. No exceptions. The real estate brokerage made its own statement. Their managing broker admitted the office should have verified every location before sending agents. Internal policies changed there as well. The agents who had visited my ranch weren't blamed. Most had simply trusted the information they received. Several of them reached out personally. A few even returned later in the month. Not for a tour. Just to apologize face to face. I appreciated that. One afternoon, the neighbor who had first arrived that morning stopped by again. We leaned against the fence, watching the horses graze. He looked down the driveway. Hard to believe all those vehicles were lined up out there. I laughed. It felt like weeks ago. In reality, it had barely been 10 days. The county eventually removed every unauthorized sign. The website advertising my property disappeared. The online registration page was taken offline. As for the investor, he never contacted me again. Not with another offer. Not with another letter. Nothing. Whether he truly misunderstood the situation or ignored obvious warning signs was something the investigators handled. I never learned every detail. And honestly, I didn't need to. The biggest lesson had already become obvious. If I had assumed it was just a harmless mistake, if I had opened the gate to avoid an argument, dozens of strangers would have walked through a working horse barn, around valuable animals, around expensive equipment, around private property that had never been offered for public access. Instead, one phone call stopped everything before it grew into something much harder to untangle. The signs disappeared. The traffic stopped. The horses settled back into their routine. And my ranch went back to being exactly what it had always been. A private place. Not a marketing stop. Not a community attraction. Just home. If you enjoyed this dramatized HOA story and want to hear more neighborhood disputes that spiral into unexpected situations, consider subscribing for the next one.